Well, yeah, if we're not, I mean, again, if we're free to kind of work on a little bit a different agenda, wherever you guys want to go, we could do something. I would have gone just down adding ideas on top of the two altars tonight, but I don't see any new faces. So anybody got some input on what you'd like to work on tonight?
I have a kind of general question, but maybe it won't generate more than just a single comment, but what does it mean that Jesus became sin for us? Is that just him receiving the wrath of God as we understand it, or is that something different?
I think Barb's got a good answer for that one.
Okay.
Well, I guess I was just thinking about that a little bit. He was made to be sin. I think in my mind, it is that he experienced that wrath, that second death in our stead. He offered himself to show us and experience for us that consequence, that second death, what it looks like, so that we have that example. I guess, is that what it means when he, there's so many descriptions of him bearing our sins. I remember Bobby saying in that context of bearing sins is like taking our sins away from us, which is a beautiful thing because we don't need them on us. But there's other descriptions. I remember reading one that made it sound like he still has that sin on him, and that like he swallows it up or something. I don't know. I remember asking Bobby about that, and I'm trying to think about how he answered that one. I don't remember that, but I think that was from maybe E.J. Wagner that I had read something where it had said something like that. I like the idea of him taking the sins away from us, bearing them away from us. I like that more than him still having to carry them somehow.
Well, Wagner, though, is working on the concept in the sanctuary where, the sin was transferred onto the lamb, and then from the lamb to the high priest via blood, and then from the high priest sprinkled on the altar in the holy place, and then once a year all the way into the most holy. And in that context of the story of the sanctuary and its meaning, he is still carrying them and will carry them until the scapegoat part of the story is finished. But I think, we're used to thinking of like he's still, if that means he's got to get crucified every day, that's not what that means. What was the first time the word sin appears in the Bible? Who can come up with that?
That's a good question. I guess I'm not really sure. I wanted to jump to Genesis, but I'm not sure the word is actually used.
Yeah, look up on the search. What's the first time that word sin appears?
I have to take my phone, which is my camera right now. I'll start flipping in Genesis.
Someone else can start looking.
In New King James, it's Genesis 4:7. If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door. That's the Lord talking to Cain.
So in that verse, which is the one, I was thinking that'd be the first place. Sin lies at the door. In that verse, it doesn't explain what it is. It just says it wants to get it.
If you do not do well, if you do well, you'll be accepted. If you do not do well, sin lies at the door. Yeah, so I guess it's kind of like the idea that it's sitting there trying to get in. Is that what you would get from lies at the door?
Well, when we do the two altars, which has already happened in this story, where Cain put the wrong stuff on the altar, wouldn't we, from a legalistic perspective, wouldn't we be defining that he already sinned? And why, if he already sinned, even if it was not just about the wrong thing on the altar, but just in general, was born a sinner, so he had sinned? Why is it that sin is still lying at the door if he's already a sinner? I don't know. It's an interesting thought. Who's got a verse that would you think of as a defining verse of what sin is?
Could it be that it's meaning death?
Death is at the door?
Yeah, the ultimate wages of sin is death, but there's always hope. I don't know.
Yeah, what is sin that it's right to say that Christ became sin, whatever that is? That's one worth thinking about a little bit, John.
Well, here's one verse in 1 John 5:17. All wrongdoing is sin.
All wrongdoing is sin. So he was doing wrong, but apparently, Cain that is, but apparently more wrong was at the door.
No, I think when Jesus became sin for us, it means that he came down here as a human being at the level that we were.
To become wrongdoing?
No, to redeem us from wrongdoing.
Well, right, but it says he became sin. So if sin is wrongdoing, then he came down to become wrongdoing?
No.
Take the beating of sin.
But it says he became sin.
Yeah, it's 2 Corinthians 5:21 is the reference.
I mean, other verses will say he came to redeem us from sin, so we can establish that with other verses, but this one says he became sin. Typically, the King Jamesers will throw sin is the transgression of the law, right? So if you use that definition, you could try it there and say, well, then Jesus became transgression of the law.
Transgressor of the law.
No, if sin is the transgression of the law, then he became transgression of the law. Because then the next line says, yet he knew no sin, which means he was not a transgressor, but he became whatever transgression is. I'm just trying the definition to see if it makes sense.
Could it be that he came into our fallen state? Like, meaning he had all the possibility of temptation, and could it be meaning that?
But wouldn't that then be better to define him as an overcomer of sin? Because he was tempted in all points like as we, that's a different verse, but he never succumbed to it. So rather than saying he became it, it seemed like if we're going down that piece of the discussion, it would be more useful to say that he became an overcomer of sin, which is also true.
So here's a definition of sin.
Okay.
Romans 14:23. This is NIV, I guess. It says, whoever has doubts is condemned if they eat, because their eating is not from faith, and everything that does not come from faith is sin.
Ah,
Yeah.
so if is sin, it says, so anything not of faith is sin. So then he became not faith. Does that
No,
work?
he was faithful to the end. So that doesn't work.
Yeah, but so and you can try them with all of them, and I think they're all gonna work. When we connect that, it's talking about at the cross. That verse, he became sin. He didn't become sin when he was born as a baby. He became sin only at the cross, because he became what it would be to not have faith in God. Not that he didn't have faith, but he went through what it would be to not have faith. So it's not in the Bible, but we use the term separation. And so if sin is, which I'm very comfortable with this myself, sin is separation, which is what I think the verse about sin is the transgression of the law. I think that's what it means. And anything that's not of faith is sin. I think that's the same thing. It's what it means. It's just looking at it from different angles to make sure we're not getting hung up on just the outward wrongdoing. The outward wrongdoing is caused by the problem within, which comes from either lack of faith or not having the law inside. So if we inside are in opposition to the law or not in alignment with the law, then what's going to come out is acts of wrongdoing. That's the result of that. But the core problem is separation, actually. So Jesus became separation, or he became separated. We hear it that way, and to our English, we'd like that better. He became separated. He went through separated or separation. So he became separation. That, I don't think, at least for me, that doesn't sound confusing. And so then if we draw from that idea to see the other verses that are actually the way it's written, I think it comes out the same. He became transgression. He was not a transgressor, but he became transgression. Meaning, what is that? So I think it's really just referring to showing us at the cross everything that sin is and what it does to us. And anyway, that's
So the
it's
verse,
kind of useful.
the verse
Go ahead,
that says that, for he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. So if we understand that to be that Jesus was separated from the Father willingly, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. So is it some kind of formula where the only way we could become the righteousness of God in him? Is it just because we see that and understand that he went through that for us, that it allows us to become the righteousness of God in him?
You mean, what's the relationship between the him doing it part and the our becoming part?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I think it's proper now. So often we're talking about that Jesus didn't have to go through death in order to change the Father, to change the Father's attitude or his character or his willingness to love and forgive. But everything about the cross was required for rescue and for change of sinful man. Whether it be Abraham looking at the cross through the sacrificial system, or whether it be us looking backwards on the actual, which is much clearer than the one Abraham was looking at, but ultimately the same, then it is a necessity that he became sin in order for us to become the righteousness of God, but not to change God, but to change us. I think for me, that's the important clarity difference, is it's not a requirement that God had or he wasn't willing to rescue and save. It was the rescue and saving. The becoming sin was part of the rescue saving activity.
So the becoming sin, the being separated, what part does that play in the salvation of man? I see the verses before that, it says that, a famous verse, that God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself, not imputing their trespasses to them.
There's your forgiveness part.
Yep. He's committed to us the word of reconciliation.
Well, the interesting part about that, then when he becomes man, they're going through that whole thing that he never lost trust and dependence on the Father. And that's how we're to make it at the end, is to have total dependence on God.
So it was done as an example to us as well. That do you think that means we'll have to experience that feeling of separation?
Well, I was going to say, but that's a little bit mixing two things. See, there's two things that Jesus is going through at the cross. One is a revelation of his immutable character, unchangeable character, his consistency, same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, no shadow of turning. So that is part of the revelation that is referred to in the verses about it was God manifest in Christ reconciling, right? But part of the reconciling formula required that an understanding be given of what sin is and what it does. Because God said in the beginning, sin is going to bring about death. And Satan said, no, it's not. Eve, you can eat this fruit, you won't die. So God wasn't talking about sleep death, a nap. He was talking about actual death in the end, second death, we could call it, or death that is the death of the wicked as a result of the sin. So part of the reconciling formula, it is necessary that be revealed by God going through it, not by other humans going through it yet. That there isn't full reconciliation to God for man to become fully the righteousness of God without that being revealed. That's the necessity of Christ becoming sin.
Well, we probably couldn't make it.
So would you say that the biggest confusion in all of that is the way that we define sin in our lives, in our hearts, as the outward behavior, and that we don't look inwardly to see that sin is when I'm separated from God and not trusting in him?
I'd say that's certainly part of the confusion. The second part, which usually is bigger or comes first, is the motive for God saying that it was required. Like if God said, hey, this is going to take a sacrifice, the death of myself or my son, once he says that, why? Well, why is that needed? Why is that required? That is a confusion, right? Because we like, what if God could just yell and everybody would straighten up, right? If you yell at everybody and they straighten up and we don't have sin anymore, couldn't that just fix it? Well, so God has to try that. So the mountain shakes or whatever, and earthquake and fire in the mountain, and we see, does that fix it? No, it doesn't fix it. So ultimately, this whole thing has been about, one, God said it at the beginning, it's going to take a lamb, meaning his son, sacrifice. But why? Satan loves to build all the wrong reasons why. Well, because God just arbitrarily made that up. He just made a rule that said we have to have some blood or you can't get back in. Or, there's a whole list of what those are, but I think that is the core, which is actually on our two altars topic, right? The two altars, what we were really working on, what we worked on last week and are building out tonight maybe, is that what is that real need for that sacrifice? I mean, think about like last night's, those of you who were on, the conversation had to do with watching a video about atheists and their opinion about the Ten Commandments. But right in the core of that was confusion about why God required, dead animals, why God had them do sacrifices, why God had people stoned for breaking the law. I mean, all of that is a confusing conundrum for even Christians to answer in a way that, in that example from last night, was showing that in a way that people who consider themselves reasonable, logical, think it through thing, it doesn't make any sense, right? So there is that whole confusion that's based right in the beginning, which I think we see in Patriarchs of Prophets, where we read last week, where it said that Satan watched, Adam and his sons, and saw some communion going on there. God was communicating something, and he set himself to intercept it. I guess that is from Desire of Ages. Set himself to intercept it and to confuse it, which is where all the confusion comes from. But it is over that piece of it. I think John is part of it. Is sometimes we talk so much about God's love and his love being revealed in the cross, and the cross was to reveal his love, which it was. That's 100% true. But the other piece that was needed was, now he's got to reveal sin. What is it? What does it do? What is the result of it? Was God making that up when he said that, sin will destroy and cause death, or not? And so when he and the universe can watch him separate himself from his son, and Jesus goes through that separation experience at the cross, now the universe is actually watching God carry out exactly what he said would happen, not because he's arbitrarily, inflicting this on Jesus, but it is the result of if God separates from Jesus, who at that time was human, there can't be a continuance of existence. It doesn't. It's like the tree branch broken off the tree. And I think that is as equal in importance to understand as the revealing of God's love at the cross. Both of those were right there. And you take one piece away and hang on to just the other, and you still only got half of the picture, so to speak.
So the temptation often is to believe that Jesus died because of crucifixion, right? Many people, it's interesting to me that it's easily confused at that point. Not that I don't understand it, I think, in the way that you're saying, but you have this moment where it seems that Jesus is suffering for our benefit, and by his own choice, exactly what Moses offered to do for the children of Israel, which is that he would rather give up his eternal life than to, let the children of Israel be destroyed.
Yeah, so the core of that confusion, and then you guys can discuss this. I'm going to use the phrase you just used, just because it works good, which was, he was suffering for our benefit. What we skip over really quick, and then run off into some general conversations in normal theology with this, is how does his suffering benefit us? Well, why is that any benefit to us? I mean, if you were there watching it, well, now you can go to the Mel Gibson movie, right? You can watch that. I watched it one time. You can watch it once and go, yeah, you know what? It's actually hard on my psyche to even watch that. Is that good for me? Do I need to watch that 3 or 4 times? So it's horrific.
Am I
So
supposed
how
to
is
just
that-
feel really bad? Is that what's
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's what it was when I was young. Usually the sermons about the cross and how horrible it was to make me, at least what I took from it. I'm not saying they intended this. I don't know what they intended, but my receiving of it was, yeah, I need to feel really bad about how bad I am because what I am caused that. I wasn't sure how because I wasn't there, but apparently it did because that's what I was told. So it's that piece that is often just Satan. That's Satan's idea that somehow I needed to be made to feel more guilty or something by that, and so that weighs the guilt up heavy, and now I could maybe stop sinning because I feel guilty enough about what I was doing. I don't know, but
I got to admit that hasn't worked for me yet. So
no, it doesn't fix it.
I got to find a better way. Yeah.
So tonight's verses that would be helpful on the altar are like, for instance, in Isaiah. We spend usually quite a bit of time just on Isaiah chapter 1, so you know that one well. But right in there, he actually tells them, don't bring me any more of these sacrifices. And he's talking about lambs and goats and the ones, not vegetables. And then another one is in Samuel when Saul, goes off and he's supposed to kill everything, but instead he brings back all these sheep and cattle, thousands of them. And his justification was, well, because now we can, give some sacrifices to God, some extra, as if what? God wanted that or God needed that? And so the obvious verse there is, I delight in obedience, not sacrifice. And Saul was, well, specifically it was, is it better to obey is better than sacrifice is the verse I'm trying to quote. Right. So in Saul's story, obedience, which wasn't there, is really what God is after, even through the sacrifices. And if sacrifices are not producing obedience, then what good are they? So that's our sort of rough sort of version of that verse. But then the other one would be Psalms 51, which I like, probably one of the best ones, right? When David says, I figured out it's not burnt offerings that you want. Those are not the sacrifices that you desire. So what is it then in the ceremonial sacrifices? That'd be one angle to look at it from, because obviously it should match. What is in the real sacrifice that we could say, well, God was pleased with that sacrifice, a sweet smelling aroma to him. How is the death of that's what I could hear the atheist saying that real quick. How does the death of his own son smell sweet to him at all? And
I think my initial response to that would be because there was nothing of self in it. Not even one iota, which is complete obedience.
Yeah, but is it because God desires perfect obedience so much and can't get it out of any of us that he finally went, oh, good, I finally got some perfect obedience out of somebody, right? Because that's where we would go with it from the wrong perspective of the motive that God has for these sacrifices.
Right, yeah, that's putting the wrong motive on him. But what is really complete obedience would also equate total faith. Total trust and complete faith in the Father. So those are actually kind of one and the same.
Right. But again, if we allow that idea to be couched in a God who demands this high standard or he's not happy, it's gonna create a mess. And that to me is what's fun about actually studying all this stuff is that every piece that God has ever given, whether it's the sacrificial system or some promise that he made in the Old Testament or some, explanation of consequences, every single one of them, the devil's got a way to spin that out the wrong direction. Every verse.
So maybe if we look at it from the standard perspective or the pattern perspective, right? So and we could use some analogies in this, like Jesus as the pattern. He had to be the perfect pattern. He couldn't be a partial pattern. He had to be the perfect pattern, because without the perfect pattern, we'd be lost.
That's Richard Apple.
And I would say the beauty of having the perfect pattern is that it keeps us in the knowledge of our great need, because whenever we look to him, we recognize how much we are unlike him, and it keeps us dependent on the goodness, the mercy, and the grace of God. But for us to have anything other than the perfect pattern would be terrible. It reminds me of this interaction I had with a lady at church once. Somehow someone had brought up the book Adventist Home. Ellen White quotes about how to run a good household and all of that. And this lady made this comment like, "Oh, that was such a terrible book. Someone gave me that book many, many years ago, and I read it, and I thought, how could anyone ever do all of these things?" And I got rid of the book. I was like, it's just, no one could ever do it all, right? And it got me to thinking. And so I went to her after the class, and I just asked her, I said, I know looking at that is probably very daunting, but let me ask you a question. Would you want Sister White to tell us only part of what we should do, or maybe water it down so that it's easier, or how would you want it to be presented? And I think when we consider that about Christ, right, we consider that about the perfect pattern, why would we ever want something that wasn't perfect to be shown to us?
Well, and again, that we see the beauty in it because we're looking at it. Wow, this helps us really know and understand the love of God. But again, just from another perspective on that video, and it's been too long that those requirements, those standards, those, how perfect he is and all that has been used as a way to try to pressure, push, beat people into obedience. But that's not true obedience. So we actually got to get to the real heart motive behind each one of these pieces, whether it be why God used sacrifices in the first place, or what kind of obedience is he looking for? Is he really looking for, as long as you follow the description of the rules exactly, that's good enough? Well, no, not according to Isaiah chapter 1, right? We got all these ceremonies, but there's something bigger, something more. So I think that, and that's really the heart of the discussion about the two altars, is what's he looking for? We can go into, for instance, you've seen us do it before, where we're talking about tithing, heathen and true, or health reform, heathen and true, dress reform, Sabbath keeping, heathen and true. And you're going to have a perverted version of every single one of these. That's way more common in people's understanding than the correct one. So that's why the correct one is so hard to get. But every little verse is useful to the discussion, even the ones like, he was made to be sin. Well, yeah, what does that mean? I thought he was just had it placed on him. and so in one version, well, there's two things. There's Jesus and then there's sin. And he was just put on him, but he's a different thing. Well, no, that verse says he was made to be it. And then you got to grapple with that, right? I think said so many different ways, it does. It should challenge us to get to the heart of the matter better. But let me Dad, did you have anything more you wanted to pitch in on that idea of made to be sin?
No, that's pretty good. You guys going down the path. I mean,
I was going to ask Barb and Shady to chime in here at this point about anything to do with either made to be sin that we've been talking about so far, or something that you guys would be interested in doing related to our drawing on the two altars that is stirring in your minds.
Just as a quick question, do you know, Bobby, when the Shekinah glory left the temple for the last time? And how long? Because I know they were doing sacrifices way past the point where the Shekinah glory wasn't even in there, and they just kept it a secret. Do you know if we have any kind of record of when that happened?
Well, we could put it together. Off the top of my head, it's way back, after Solomon's time, when you're going through the wicked kings era, because you lead from the wicked kings into Babylon conquering Israel, and that's when the ark was actually hidden away in a cave somewhere. Is one of the way Ellen White says it. But from Scripture, we know that the ark was hidden away, and after that, when they came back from Babylon to rebuild the temple, the ark was never put back in there, and the Shekinah glory was never back in there. So generally, I know it was before Babylon conquered and wrecked the temple or whatever. But how far back there, I don't have a recollection.
Well, there's that reading, I forget where it is, but when the Spirit moved from this place to that place to that place, and finally all the way to the Mount of Olives, and then left.
You're talking about at Jesus' time?
No, it was way back. It was before God allowed them to take. Bob says it's in Ezekiel. It was before the destruction of Jerusalem the first time.
Right. It's somewhere before Babylon. But what would be interesting is to go back in the Bible and look for any, where do we have the last reference of it actually being there? Not that would tell us when it left for sure, but at least that would be our, last reference to it's there.
I was wondering if there's a connection to when God starts making those statements about, it's your mercy I want, not your sacrifices, those kind of things. Did the Shekinah glory leave at that moment, even if it was just as a visible signal to the priest that this whole thing just isn't what I'm after, because you guys have messed it up? I'm just wondering if there's a connection to be made there.
Well, so we could take, and friends, and look at the verses in Ezekiel about the vision he had on the temple being filled with snakes and creepy crawly things and all that, which was a vision. But see if anywhere after that, is there any reference to the Shekinah glory being there? I don't recall any. The one I do recall would have been, of course, Solomon, the obvious one, right after the temple was dedicated, and then the temple was filled with fire and smoke and all that. So we say, there's Shekinah glory came in the temple. Now, after that, do we have any specific reference to it? It would be interesting to look into that.
Yeah.
But certainly by Babylon, and after that, no, it wasn't there. Neither was the ark.
Okay.
What is the glory that you guys are talking about? What is that?
That is the presence of God. So in the temple, you have the outer court, and then the holy place, the most holy place. And in the most holy place was where the Ark of the Covenant was. Mm-hmm. And the Shekinah glory was it was a bright light that rested on the Ark, on the throne, and it represented God's presence. It was God's presence in the temple. But there was a point in time where his presence no longer was there, and yet the Jewish people continued to do the ceremonies, right? They continued to sacrifice lambs and do all the things, but God's presence wasn't there. And I was just wondering if there's a connection between things God said about sacrifice, like it's not the lambs that I want, it's not all the slaughter that I want. If there's a connection between him saying that and his presence leaving the temple. just from a timing perspective.
The funds connection, like Shady may not know this part. So we're talking about like in the wilderness, when they came out of Egypt, when God brought them out of Egypt, there was a pillar of cloud. You read about that, and a pillar of fire at night and cloud by day. And that was God's presence, right? Leading Israel through the wilderness. And when they'd set up the temple, or it wasn't called temple then, it was called the sanctuary, or the tent, tabernacle, then this Shekinah glory, or this pillar of cloud, pillar of fire, would move right over the Ark of the Covenant and descend down as if it's going into its house, so the people could see the fire and smoke and whatnot coming out of the tabernacle every time that happened. Then when the time to move, then that pillar of cloud fire would go up in the air out of the tabernacle and then head off in the direction that they were supposed to follow. That's kind of how the whole process went. So when you get into where Israel is actually in Canaan many years later, and Solomon builds his version of that tabernacle, big fancy, huge temple, there's this, at the dedication of the temple, they offer a lot of sacrifices. I don't remember the numbers, but it's thousands of rams and thousands. Anyway, so it seems like this huge bloodbath. But the Shekinah glory, or the pillar of cloud and fire, comes over that new temple, goes into it, and you get all this fire and smoke coming out of there again to say that God, is in his house, the house that they built for him to be in. Well, so then if you know that after it was conquered by Babylon, never again did the Ark of the Covenant come into the temple, nor the physical manifestation of what they, had heard about with God's fire and smoke and all that. So it sort of set the people up for looking for, because there was a prophecy given that the second temple, meaning the one built after Babylon conquered them, when they came back from Medo-Persia, that temple's glory would exceed Solomon's, right? So Solomon's was this grand physical building. And then they had the one they built, that was there in Jesus' time, that was after they came back from Syria, Medo-Persia, and Babylon. But that temple, they knew physically was never even close to the equal of Solomon's. And yet the prophecy had been given that the second would be more glorious than the first. Well, that prophecy was to give a setup for the people to keep wondering, how is this one going to be, more glorious than the first one? Because you look at it, it's not. Well, maybe the ark would be found. Maybe we could get the ark back in there. If we get the ark back in there, then maybe Shekinah glory would come again. At least we'd be back to close to what Solomon, had with the glory of a temple. But unbeknownst to them, because they didn't really understand it fully, was that God himself in human physical flesh, named Jesus, was going to show up in that temple. Not as a cloud of smoke and fire, and you can't see his face, and you can't talk to him or touch him or anything like that, but actual, the Jesus that they could touch and talk to and be with. And in that way, that prophecy was fulfilled. But I think the setup about there not being the Shekinah glory and the ark was to keep the people constantly stirred on the question of how is God going to fulfill this prophecy. And if they'd have stayed on that question, God would have revealed to them, well, this is how. Here's my son. He's flipping over tables. Anyway, that's just putting all the pieces of that story together. It's kind of fun.
He's cleansing it and opening it up to everyone.
Yeah, I was going to take down the partition wall between the Jew and the Gentile.
Did that glory go away when Jesus was born? Or was that stuff still going on when Jesus was a baby?
Well, that was John's question. And the Shekinah glory had not been in that temple since, how many years, Mom would know the answer to this question, how many years before Jesus was Babylon conquered Jerusalem? Is that 420.
Yeah.
400 and some, I forget.
Yeah, it was 400 something. So 400 plus years before Jesus was born, that Shekinah glory and the Ark of the Covenant was no longer in any temple of the Jews. And so in Jesus' time, the Levites, the priests, they were doing the ceremonies, and then every year, once a year, the high priest would go into the most holy place where there was supposed to be an ark and a Shekinah glory, but he'd go in there and it's just an empty room, nothing in there. so I find that just sort of a little amusing, ironically, like God going, you see a problem here? we're missing something very important. But
Yeah, I think I've often thought of this, and maybe it was a quote, something I read from Ellen White or whatever, but when the veil was torn in two, it was exposed to the people that the glory of God wasn't there. And that always left me with the impression, well, apparently the common people had no idea. They
might not.
Yeah, so.
It might not have been kept, as part of their knowledge that it wasn't, I don't know, but certainly they knew now. It's like, whoa, that's a good point. There's nothing in there. In fact, we just crucified the Shekinah glory.
Yeah.
And Jesus said, behold, your house is left to you desolate. That's an exact reference to the absence of the Shekinah glory in the holy place.
Yeah.
Well, so that's fun stuff. Anybody else? Last thought or comment you want to bring up before we done for tonight?
Oh goodness, I feel like I sucked up all the time. I apologize to everyone else. I didn't realize what time it was.
It was a good connection to our two altars. So I see Laura. It looks like Lori and Darren are on here. Are you guys on there? Well, hi. Anyway.
Yeah. I think Darren just got on. So.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Barb, you want to throw in the mix before we wrap it up?
Well, I guess I wanted to hear a little repeat of what you had said about him being made sin, because I think I was moving around and such, and I didn't catch everything you said, and I'd not to rehash the entire night, but
the summary was sin is actually separation from God. And I'm not meaning that in contradiction of the other verses, because sin is transgression of law is the same thing. It's transgression happens because, like a tree branch, we're disconnected from God. And then the other one, anything that's not of faith, which would be the branch attached, anything that's not of faith is sin. So we're still always talking about separation. So really, Jesus was made to be separated. He was made to reveal to us, and this was needed for redemption, that it needed to be seen in the universe what sin is, what it does, what is the nature of it, and what is the end result of it. Now, Jesus didn't show us the part that is, what does it do to our natures? The people crucifying Jesus show us that part. But what Jesus did show us, that's why it says he was made to be sin, even though he knew no sin. He wasn't sinful, is that he showed us what separation ultimately is. Because he had said that at the beginning, and Satan, of course, said, no, that wasn't true. And so part of the redemption, the necessities to deliver redemption, was to make clear that God didn't just make that up, and that it wasn't him losing his temper and beating people up. Not that kind of death. It's not about that. It's about the separation death, which Jesus goes through at the cross. So in that way, he was made to be sin, or go through the full results of sin. So I think it works too to say he was made to be transgression of the law, because he wasn't transgressing the law, but he went through what the results of transgression of the law is. And then he was made to be what is not faith. So he was faithful, and he never lost faith, but he went through what not having faith in God would do to us. And so in every way, it works.
Good. Hey,
Thank
Uncle
you.
Rich, how's your Arise class going?
I'm just loving it.
Yeah, are you ready to graduate yet?
No, I'm about halfway through,
Yeah, wow.
but it's been very, very good to me. It's outstanding.
Yeah. Keeps you
What's
busy,
the
huh?
Arise class?
That's from Light Bearers with, well, they have several, but it's David Asherick and Ty Gibson, and I had 15 on health, and
Wow.
there's 15 classes on Daniel, which was pretty interesting because he didn't go through everything on the beast and stuff. He went through how the covenant is right in Daniel. How he did it. So
Cool. Good.
All right,
Well, you'll
so
have to teach us sometime.
next week, I guess we'll partly have to just see if any new visitors are here, or maybe as to what we do. But if we don't work, well, what do you guys want to do? I know we started talking about prophecy and different stuff, and we shifted that to Sabbath afternoon. We could work on it next Thursday if we don't have visitors, so to speak. I don't mind staying on track with talking still more like next week. We could talk about the sanctuary. But you guys have done that a bunch, so I don't want to just keep going around the same merry-go-round if you're not going to get any out of it.
I like the sanctuary one. Actually, Shady, have you seen the sanctuary presentation yet?
He went over it in Walla Walla
Okay.
after one of our meetings.
Yeah, just Barb and Shady and I did it. I think the last time I was down there.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So maybe Shady and Barb, can you guys come up with a couple of alternate questions to work on if we don't have visitors next Thursday?
Sure.
Text me something.
Okay.
And then if I need to send out reading assignments for it, I'll have John send those out. I've had you kind of been putting on a list, reading stuff for you guys to do, but we haven't really stopped and spent time talking about all that together. And I kind of meant to throw it out there to give you a lot to regurgitate on that we would then bring to a more concise conversation. So it wasn't that I was saying we needed to go through all the details of all those chapters necessarily together, but if you got some pieces of it, in anything that we've been, reading on either in scripture or in spirit prophecy the last 4 weeks, you could toss that out there too, and we could kind of focus in on either a couple of paragraphs or a chapter or something if you got some thoughts we need to work on. So anyway, send me a couple of ideas, and I will still be prepared that if we have some visitors that we will either conclude on the two altars or we'll work on the sanctuary a bit. All righty. Okay, good to see everybody. Have a good rest of the night. John, you want to just have a closing prayer for us?
Sure. Father, we just thank you for this time that we could come together. We thank you for your love. And Lord, the more we dig, the more we realize there is to know. And we just ask that you would bless this journey for each of the people in this group and help us all to not only just learn facts, but to let it sink into our hearts and change those hearts. We thank you that you want to do that, and you've promised that you will do that. And we look forward to the day when we get to see you face to face. Amen.
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 Amen. I thank you, John. Okay,
Good night,
we'll see
everyone.
some of you on Sabbath.
Thank you.
Have a good day tomorrow.
Goodbye.